The most dangerous thing a man can do is let a woman underestimate him. I did it on purpose. My name is Daniel Price. And on Friday, April 3rd, 2023, she made that mistake. I was at the kitchen table in our home in Pacific Heights, San Francisco, drinking my first coffee of the morning, still in yesterday's shirt, reading nothing in particular. It was a normal morning, a quiet morning, the kind of morning that doesn't announce itself, that just settles in around you while the city outside does its slow, gray, fog-covered thing. Victoria was already dressed, full armor, as I had come to think of it, blazer pressed, heels precise, that particular shade of lipstick she wore exclusively on days she had board meetings or needed to walk into a room and immediately own it. She moved through the kitchen the way she moved through most spaces, efficiently, purposefully, like every step had already been planned 2 steps ahead. She set a manila envelope on the table next to my coffee mug without breaking stride. "My lawyers drafted something," she said, scrolling to her phone without looking up. "I should have done it from the beginning. I've worked too hard to leave anything to chance." I looked at the envelope. Her firm's legal letterhead on the label, a little too crisp, a little too ready. The kind of document that had been sitting in a drawer waiting for the right moment, and someone had decided this was it. I wasn't surprised by the document itself. I want to be clear about that. I was surprised she had finally moved. There's a difference. "What is this?" I said, though some quiet, watchful part of me already knew. "A prenuptial agreement." She said it the way you say the dry cleaning is ready. Flat, logistical, a thing to be handled and moved past. "We've been married for 2 years, Victoria, which is exactly why we need clarity going forward." She finally looked up from her phone, smiled, that particular smile of hers that started at the mouth and stopped well before it reached her eyes. "Take your time reading it. My lawyers are available if you have questions." She grabbed her bag, walked to the door, didn't kiss me goodbye. She hadn't done that in 7 months. I had counted. The door clicked shut. I sat there. The envelope sat there with me, patient as a bill you've been avoiding. I picked it up, put it down, picked it up again. 11 pages. Her signature already on page 9. Her lawyer's contact cards, paper clipped to the front like this was a real estate closing, and I was expected to simply sign and move on with my day. I read every word. And somewhere around page 6, where my assets were described as unverified and presumed minimal, something shifted in my chest. Not anger, clarity. But this story doesn't start on Friday, April 3rd, 2023. It starts 3 years earlier, on a Wednesday night in late February 2020, when Victoria Hale walked into my life wearing a black dress and a smile that, looking back, almost certainly had a terms and conditions section I had never been given the opportunity to read. Stanford Alumni Mixer, San Francisco, the kind of event where everyone is either networking or performing the convincing illusion that they are not networking. I was standing near the back by the shrimp cocktail, which is where the real people stand, nursing a club soda and quietly questioning the series of decisions that had led me to be in this room on a Wednesday night, when I could have been home watching something forgettable on television. My college friend Lucas Grant had called me 2 days earlier with a particular energy he reserves for when he has decided something is for my own good. "You haven't been out since you sold the company," he said. "You're becoming one of those guys." "What guys?" "The kind who names their houseplants." "I don't have houseplants, Lucas." "Exactly," he said. "That's worse." So I went, navy blazer, no tie. I had given myself a strict internal budget of 45 minutes, 3 handshakes, and then home to Pacific Heights to watch something I would have forgotten by morning. She found me. I know that now. But that Wednesday night in February 2020, standing by the shrimp cocktail with my club soda, I just thought I was lucky. "You're not working the room," she said, appearing beside me the way certain people appear, as though they had simply always been there and you had only just noticed. I looked around. "Neither are you." She laughed. Actually laughed. The real kind, not the practiced social variety that circulates through events like these like currency. It caught me completely off guard. "Touché." She held out her hand. "Victoria Hale. Daniel Price." "What do you do, Daniel Price?" Here it was. The question I had answered 40 times at events like this one. I had developed a system for it. Keep it simple. Keep it boring. Keep them moving. Consulting, I said. Retired mostly. I dabble. Most people moved on after dabble. It was a conversational off-ramp I had engineered specifically for that purpose. Victoria Hale did not take it. We talked for 2 hours that night. She told me she was CEO of a mid-sized logistics firm called Fescor. Growing fast, investor-backed, the whole architecture of ambition assembled and running at full speed. She was sharp in a way that I find genuinely difficult to resist. Funny in that dry, understated register that doesn't announce itself. That makes you feel like you caught something most people would have missed. And she looked at me the way someone looks at a puzzle they haven't solved yet. I should have recognized that look. I have used it myself. Here is what Victoria Hale thought she knew about Daniel Price on that February Wednesday night. Comfortable consultant. Nice apartment in Pacific Heights. Sensible shoes. Low-key by nature. Pleasant company. Not particularly remarkable. Here is what was actually true. 3 years before I met her, I had quietly sold a supply chain software company I had built over 9 years to a private equity firm in Chicago for a number that my accountant still gets slightly nervous saying out loud in a room with other people. There was no press release, no LinkedIn announcement, no celebration dinner with people who would have spent the rest of their lives referencing it. I signed the papers, drove home to Pacific Heights, ordered a deep dish pizza, which San Francisco cannot produce properly for the record and never has, and watched the documentary about penguins. That was it. That was the whole celebration. I had learned something over the years of building that company and watching other men build theirs. Money that makes noise attracts problems that would not have found you otherwise. I had watched enough people implode chasing recognition, chasing the validation of being publicly known to be successful, to understand that the quietest man in the room is almost always the most dangerous one. Not because quiet men are hiding something sinister, but because they are watching everything while everyone else is performing. What Victoria thought she was dating was a comfortable, low-profile consultant with a modest life and a decent apartment. What she was actually dating was a man who held stakes in 11 companies, owned real estate across 4 continents through holding entities she had never heard of, and had not told a single person his actual net worth in years. Not because I was ashamed of it, but because I had learned that information shared is leverage surrendered, and I had not yet met anyone I trusted enough to give that leverage to freely. We dated for 14 months. She took me to her company galas, introduced me to her investors, her board members, her carefully curated professional circle. She introduced me as her brilliant low-key partner, with particular emphasis on the low-key that I noticed each time and filed away without comment. I wore the role well, sensible trousers, a modest watch, nothing that announced itself, nothing flashy. About 6 weeks before the wedding, Lucas pulled me aside at one of those galas. Third drink in, his tie loosened, wearing the expression he gets when he's been thinking about something for a while and has decided he is finally going to say it. She introduces you like a prop, he said. You know that. She's proud of me, Lucas. He set his glass down on the nearest surface. She introduces her company's quarterly results with more warmth than she introduces you. He looked at me directly. I'm not saying this to be unkind. I'm saying it because you're my friend, and I'm paying attention. I laughed it off. I was good at that, laughing things off while filing them carefully in the part of my mind that never stops paying attention. Saturday, May 22nd, 2021. We got married. Small ceremony. Her idea entirely. She called it intimate, the word I thought of but did not say was efficient. 22 people. Fog sitting low over the bay the way it does on San Francisco mornings that cannot decide whether they're beautiful or simply cold. Both, usually. That is the honest answer. Her investors sent flowers. Expensive ones, the kind that required planning and a budget. I remember standing there looking at the arrangement and thinking, why would investors send wedding flowers? It was a small thought. I filed it away with everything else. The first year of marriage was good. I mean that sincerely and without qualification. Then came month 18. Sunday, November 9th, 2022. Victoria was at the office. She was often at the office on Sundays, which I had long since stopped commenting on, because it was simply the architecture of her life, and I had understood that before I married her. I was home at the kitchen table reviewing investment documents, the kind of quiet Sunday afternoon work that looks like nothing from the outside, but requires a particular quality of attention. We shared a household drive, tax records, insurance documents, property deeds, the standard infrastructure of a shared life. I was not snooping. I want that stated clearly and without ambiguity. I was looking for our homeowner's insurance renewal, which I needed for a call on Monday morning, and I took a wrong turn through a subfolder labeled simply Archive. And there it was, a document titled Exit Strategy R. My first thought, and I remember this precisely, was that it was a very clean font for something that was about to ruin my Sunday afternoon. I opened it, read it once, sat completely still for a moment, then read it again. Then I sat very still for approximately 4 minutes, which, if you know anything about how I operate, is 4 minutes longer than I typically sit still for anything. 12 pages. Thorough, clinical, our marriage laid out with the precision of a business acquisition document. My financial profile, or what she believed to be my financial profile, described as financially adjacent but legally separate from her own assets. A timeline broken neatly into years with the efficiency of someone who had thought about this carefully and more than once. Year 2, consolidate joint accounts. Year 3, increase her public asset base. Year 5, initiate dissolution. And on page 7, a name, Ethan Cole, partner at Fescor. I had met him at 3 separate company dinners. Smooth presentation, firm handshake, the particular brand of easy confidence that comes from having been told you were impressive often enough that you have started to believe it without question. He called me buddy every single time he shook my hand. Buddy. I closed the laptop, walked to the kitchen, made pasta from scratch, because there are certain situations that require a particular quality of focus that only comes from working with your hands, from kneading dough and paying attention to something immediate and physical and entirely within your control. I opened a bottle of Napa Red, set 2 places at the table, and then, sitting there in the quiet of that kitchen while the pasta finished, I understood something that was almost worse than the betrayal itself. She hadn't chosen me in spite of my invisibility. She had chosen me because of it. Think about it carefully. No social media presence, no Forbes profile, no ego that required public maintenance or regular feeding. A man who had sold a company for a number nobody outside his accountant knew, and celebrated by ordering pizza and watching a documentary about penguins. I was, in her careful and thorough estimation, the perfect financial hiding place. Her investors had been asking questions about her lifestyle, her spending patterns, her judgment. A steady, modest, low-profile husband neutralizes that noise completely, makes an ambitious woman look grounded, makes scrutiny lose interest and move on. I wasn't a partner. I wasn't even really a husband in the way I had understood that word to mean something. I was a strategy with a wedding ring. And the most dangerous part of all of it was this. She was right about everything she thought she knew about me. I was invisible. I was quiet. I was exactly what she had researched and selected and decided would serve her purpose. She had simply never thought to research what quiet men do when they have been underestimated by someone they trusted. She came home at 8:47 that evening. I know the exact time because I had been watching the clock in the particular way you watch a clock when you are waiting for something you have not yet decided how to handle. Something smells good, she said, dropping her bag by the door. Cassio y Pepe, I said. Sit down. She sat. We ate. She told me about her day. I told her about mine, the edited version, which was the only version she had ever received, though she did not know that. We had wine. I cleaned up. We went to bed. And while she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling in the dark and made a decision that would take the better part of 2 years to execute properly. No confrontation. No explosion. No scene. No moment where I threw everything on the table and demanded an explanation for 12 pages of clinical betrayal filed neatly in a subfolder called Archive. Because here's the thing about a long con. The only way to beat it is to run a longer one. Which brings me back to Friday, April 3rd, 2023. The envelope, 11 pages. My assets described as unverified and presumed minimal. Minimal? I almost laughed out loud at that word sitting there on the page. So confident and so completely wrong. I finished my coffee, set the mug down with the particular deliberateness of someone who has already made every decision that matters, picked up my phone, and called the one man I should have called 5 months earlier. Grant Reed, my attorney, old friend, sharper than he looks, which is saying something meaningful because he looks like a man who gets into spirited arguments with referees at his children's soccer games and considers as a legitimate use of his Saturday mornings. He has been with me since the first company I ever built. In the early days when the company was 3 people and a rented desk and nobody was confident it was going to become anything. He picked up on the second ring. Grant, I said, I need you in San Francisco. When? As soon as you can manage. That bad? I looked out the window at the bay. Friday morning. The fog just beginning to lift off the water in that slow, reluctant way it has, like it knows it has to go, but is not in any particular hurry about it. No, I said, it's about to get that good. A brief pause. What did you find? Let's just say someone has been playing chess. I said, with a man who invented the board. I'll book the flight tonight. I hung up, poured my second coffee, stood at the window looking out at San Francisco on a Friday morning in April, gray and gorgeous and completely, magnificently indifferent to everyone's problems, the way San Francisco always is. She thought she had married a modest man with a comfortable, uncomplicated life. She had married the most patient man she had ever met. And patience, I have learned over many years of watching and waiting and building things quietly in rooms where nobody was paying attention, is just revenge that has not yet introduced itself. Let me tell you something about patience that most people have wrong. Most people think it is passive, quiet, a form of weakness dressed up as virtue. They are wrong about that in every possible way. Patience is the most aggressive posture available to a man who knows what he is doing and has decided to wait for exactly the right moment to do it. It is waking up every morning knowing precisely what is coming and choosing to wait anyway, choosing to smile, choosing to pour the wine and ask about her day and sit across the dinner table from a woman who has your exit strategy saved in a subfolder called Archive and not flinching, not once, not even slightly. That is not weakness. That is war conducted at a frequency most people cannot hear. Grant landed at SFO the morning after she dropped that envelope. First Saturday in April, looking like a man who had slept on the plane because he had. He walked into my office in the financial district, carrying a legal pad, a gas station coffee that he was treating with considerably more respect than it deserved, an expression of a man who already understood this was going to be interesting. Small office, desk, 2 chairs, a window facing the wrong direction. Paid for in cash through a management company Victoria had never heard of and had no reason to look for. She thought my office was our kitchen table. That was entirely the point. Grant sat down, took a long, considered sip of his terrible coffee, looked at me with a direct, unhurried attention he brings to everything that matters. Talk, he said. So I did all of it. The Stanford mixer in February 2020. The 14 months of dating. The wedding in May 2021. The Sunday afternoon in November 2022 when I went looking for an insurance document and found 12 pages that redefined everything I thought I understood about my own life. Ethan Cole's name on page 7. The 5-year timeline laid out with the precision of a project plan. The prenup landing on my kitchen table on a Friday morning like a grenade wearing a lawyer's letterhead. Grant did not interrupt. For Grant, this is extraordinary. The man interrupts judges. He interrupts people who are in the middle of sentences he already knows the end of. He sits on panels and interrupts the moderator. He interrupted me once at a closing dinner to correct a waiter about the vintage of a wine he had ordered in front of 12 people without apparent embarrassment. He did not interrupt once. When I finished, he set down his coffee, leaned back in his chair, stared at the ceiling for a long, quiet moment. She documented it. He said finally, and his voice had a quality I had not heard in it before. Something that was almost admiration, the reluctant kind you feel for an opponent who has played well. 12 pages, I said. He looked at me directly. That is either incredibly arrogant or incredibly stupid. Both, I said, which is exactly what we're going to use. He picked up his legal pad. What do you want? I slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. He picked it up. Read it slowly. I watched his eyebrows climb in the particular way they climb when Grant Reed, who has genuinely seen most things that can happen in a room where money and law occupy the same space, sees something he has not seen before. You've been sitting on this since November, he said. 5 months, Grant. I've had considerable time to think. This is going to take time to execute. She gave me the timeline herself. I said, Year 5. We have runway. He looked at the paper one more time. Then he did something I had not seen him do in 15 years of working together through deals and disputes and one genuinely terrible arbitration in Houston that neither of us speaks about by mutual agreement. He smiled. Okay, he said, let's build something. We got to work the following Monday. First thing, a new holding entity. Grant registered in Delaware over a weekend, which is one of the things I've always valued about him. He does not treat urgency as a reason to be sloppy. He treats it as a reason to be faster without becoming careless. We call it Harlan Ridge LLC. Clean, boring, the kind of name that makes accountants yawn and lawyers stop reading before they get to the interesting part. Boring names are the best hiding places. I learned that building the first company. The first move through Harlan Ridge was the one that mattered most. A 12% stake in Fescor. Her company, her centerpiece. The thing she talked about over dinner and at galas, and sometimes at breakfast when she was barely awake, the asset she was most determined to protect for me, the foundation of her entire 5-year plan. I bought into it silently, through Harlan Ridge, through a secondary holding company that connected to Harlan Ridge the way a shadow connects to a man, only visible if you know exactly where the light is coming from and are specifically looking for it. She never looked for the light. Grant spread the purchase across 3 tranches, so that no single transaction tripped a disclosure flag. Clean, invisible, boring on paper. The kind of transaction that sits in a database somewhere and is never looked at twice by anyone who does not already know what they are looking for. About 8 weeks after she dropped that prenup on my kitchen table, I owned a quiet piece of the very company she was planning to protect from me. She made me dinner that evening and called me her favorite person. I told her she was full of surprises. She had absolutely no idea how precisely accurate that statement was. Here is the part people do not always understand when I tell this story. They expect me to say I checked out, got cold, stopped showing up. They expect the emotional withdrawal that usually accompanies betrayal of this kind, the distance that makes itself known in small, accumulating ways until the other person feels it without being able to name it. I did none of that. I made dinner. I remembered anniversaries. I walked the Presidio trails with her on Sunday mornings the way we always had, the fog and the cypress trees, the bay visible between the hills, the specific quality of light on those mornings that makes you understand why people pay what they pay to live in this city. I asked about her board meetings with what appeared to be genuine interest, which was not entirely a performance because I was genuinely interested, just not for the reason she assumed. Because the moment I changed, the moment Victoria sensed even the slightest shift in temperature, the smallest cooling in the atmosphere between us, everything I was building would unravel, and Victoria could read a room the way most people read large print text, effortlessly, instantly, without appearing to try. So I gave her nothing to read. I smiled. I showed up. I poured the wine. And every Saturday morning I drove to Financial District and quietly dismantled everything she thought she had built around me, piece by careful piece, in a small office she did not know existed with a lawyer she had never heard of. Nobody said that the reversal of a long con had to look like anything other than a happy marriage. But I want to be honest about something, because this story is not only about strategy, and it would not be the true version if I left this part out. There were nights. I will not tell you how many, because that number belongs to me, and it is more than I would have predicted. Nights where I sat at the kitchen table alone after Victoria had gone to bed and felt something that did not have a clean name. Not anger, not even sadness exactly. Something closer to grief. The quiet kind that does not announce itself, that does not require an audience, that simply settles into the chest like weather you did not see coming. I had genuinely loved this woman, or I had loved who I believed her to be, which might in the end be the same thing, which might, in some ways, be worse. There was one night in particular, December, rain hammering the Pacific Heights windows the way December rain does in San Francisco when it decides to be serious about it. Victoria was asleep. I was sitting in the dark kitchen with a glass of whiskey. I was not drinking, looking at nothing specific, and it arrived without warning. The full weight of it. Not the betrayal. Not the strategy. Not any of the moving pieces I had spent months carefully assembling. Just the simple, quiet fact that I had walked into a room in February 2020 and thought I was lucky. I had wanted it to be real, even after I found the file. Some stubborn, foolish, completely human part of me had wanted it to be real and had kept wanting that longer than was sensible. I sat with that for about 10 minutes. Then I poured the whiskey out, rinsed the glass, went back to bed, and the next morning I drove to the financial district and kept building. Because wanting something to be different and allowing that one to destroy you are two entirely different choices, and I had made mine. By that summer, I moved into the logistics play. Victoria talked about her vendors constantly over dinner. The way people talk about problems that are always present and never quite resolved. The Fresno contract is bleeding us. The Chicago carrier cannot hit last-mile targets. The Portland relationship is complicated. On and on. The operational texture of a company that was growing faster than its infrastructure could comfortably support. I was also taking notes. Two of FESCOR's largest freight suppliers were running on thin margins and quietly exploring options for capital partners. One in Phoenix, one in New Jersey. I bought into both through Harlan Ridge, not controlling stakes, nothing that would draw attention or require announcement, just enough presence at the table when contract renewals came up, just enough that when Victoria's team sat down to renegotiate the terms of those relationships, the people across from them were connected, through several invisible layers, to her husband. She was negotiating against people who reported to me. I will not pretend that did not feel, on a purely human level, at least a little satisfying. That fall, Grant called on a Thursday morning. No greeting, just information, the way he delivers things when he knows I will want to hear them immediately. "Ethan Cole," he said. I sat down my coffee. "Talk to me?" He runs a personal investment fund on the side. Small, 8 limited partners. He has been quietly looking for someone to anchor a second raise. Quietly, I said, my favorite word. How much? $2 million to anchor. He would take less from the right partner. Become the right partner, I said. Arm's length, Grant. 3 layers minimum. He cannot know it is me. A pause. "Ralph," he called you buddy. To your face. 3 times. I considered that for a moment. I want 4 layers. Grant actually laughed. The first real laugh I had heard from him in months. 4 layers, he said. Got it. By early winter, I was a silent limited partner in Ethan Cole's personal investment fund. The man whose name was on page 7 of my wife's exit strategy. The man who had shaken my hand at 3 company dinners and called me buddy with the easy familiarity of someone who had never once considered that the person across from him might be paying closer attention than he was. He was now, completely unknowingly, in business with me. I want you to take a moment with that. By January 2024, here is what the board looked like. Harlan Ridge, holding 12% of FESCOR. Both of FESCOR's largest freight suppliers carrying my capital quietly, invisibly, through layers that connected back to Harlan Ridge through pathways that required knowing specifically what you were looking for to find. Ethan Cole's personal investment fund, anchored 4 layers deep by Daniel Price. And Victoria. Victoria was having her best quarter yet. FESCOR was growing. Her board was satisfied. Her institutional investors were patient. She was sleeping well, eating well, presenting well at every meeting and dinner and industry event on her calendar. She had no idea that the foundation under everything she had built had a different owner. She was standing on my floors and calling at her house. Friday, April 3rd, 2024. Exactly 1 year to the day after she placed that envelope on my kitchen table. Everything is in position, Grant said when he called at 9 in the morning. You want me to start the counter document? Not a counter, I said. A revelation. How thorough? I want her lawyers to sit down when they open it. I want the senior partner to stand up and close his office door. Give me 3 weeks. You have 2. 2 weeks later, Grant walked into my office carrying 47 pages. Set them on the desk with the careful deliberateness of someone handling something that has real weight to it. Not physical weight, but the other kind. I read every page slowly, carefully, the way you read something you have been building toward for over a year. This was everything. 11 tech investments, 3 with unicorn valuations, real estate across 4 continents, the logistics network, both suppliers fully documented, with a chain of ownership traced clearly back through every layer. Harlan Ridge's 12% stake in Fescor, the Callaway Fund, all 4 layers fully traceable, every connection documented and verifiable. All of it, back to me. I looked at the document. 47 pages. Her prenup had been 11. She had brought a knife to this. I had come back with a different kitchen entirely. Send it, I said. The response came a few days later. Not from Victoria. From her lead attorney, Nathan Cross, senior partner. 23 years in family law. A man who by reputation had seen absolutely everything that money and marriage and the intersection of the two could produce. Grant told me later that the call lasted 6 minutes. That Nathan Cross spoke with particular careful precision of a man choosing every single word before placing it. The way you walk across ice when you are not entirely certain of its thickness. Mr. Reed, he said, your client's holdings are considerably more substantial than previously understood. Yes, Grant said. They are. Mr. Price would like to revisit the terms of the prenuptial agreement. Grant looked across the desk at me. I shook my head once. Mr. Price wouldn't change a word, Grant said. The terms are hers. Every single one. A long silence. The kind of silence that is texture. That means something is being processed that requires more than a moment. I see. Nathan Cross said finally, I'll be in touch. Grant hung up, looked at me. How do you feel? I thought about a Sunday evening in November 2022. A clean font on a document that was never intended for my eyes. A ceiling I'd stare at while the woman beside me slept and dreamed of year 5. 2 years of Saturday mornings in a small office 3 blocks from where we were sitting right now. I stood up, put on my jacket. Hungry, I said, let's go get something to eat. There's a moment in every long game when the board shifts. Not dramatically, not with an explosion or a speech or a table being overturned. Just a quiet, irreversible tilt, like a ship that has already made its decision but has not yet informed the passengers. That moment came a few days after Nathan Cross's call. I was not there when he called Victoria, but Grant has a long professional acquaintance at Cross's firm, and that acquaintance mentioned, in the indirect way these things get mentioned, that the senior partner had closed his office door after that call and had not come out for 40 minutes. 40 minutes. I have been in enough negotiations, enough rooms where the numbers stopped adding up the way someone had planned, to know what 40 minutes behind a closed door means. It means the math does not work the way you believed it did. It means someone made a very expensive calculation error. It means the game has ended, and someone is sitting alone in a quiet room, beginning to understand that. Victoria came home early that Wednesday afternoon. That was the first sign. Victoria did not come home early. Ever. The woman treated her office like a primary residence, and our home like a hotel she happened to feel strongly about. But there she was, mid-afternoon, sitting at the kitchen table in our home in Pacific Heights when I walked in. No blazer, no laptop open, no phone in her hand, just sitting, in a stillness that was different from her usual stillness, in the way that a held breath is different from a resting one. I knew immediately, but I did not let my face know. "Hey," I said, setting my keys on the counter with the ordinary casualness of a man who had no idea anything was different. "You're home early." She looked at me for a long moment, really looked, the way she used in the beginning, back when I was still a puzzle she was actively working to solve. "Nathan called me," she said. "Your attorney?" "Yes." I opened the refrigerator, pulled out a bottle of water, took my time with it. "Everything okay?" "Daniel." Her voice had a quality I had not heard in it before. "Sit down." I turned around. leaned against the counter, looked at her. I'm fine here. She exhaled slowly. The exhale of a person who has been carrying something heavy for hours and whose body has simply decided it cannot maintain the weight any longer. Harlan Ridge, she said. I looked at her steadily. What about it? You know what about it? The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, San Francisco continued its complete indifference to everything happening inside our walls. Traffic on Broadway, someone's dog, the distant foghorn from somewhere out on the bay, low and regular, like a reminder that the world is larger than any single room. How long? She asked. Her voice was steady. Even then, even in this moment, Mildred did not crack easily. I will give her that absolutely. How long? What? Don't. She looked at me directly. How long? I looked at the woman I had shared a life with for 3 years, the woman who had documented our marriage like a business acquisition and saved it in a subfolder called Archive on a drive we both had access to. Since November 2022, I said. She closed her eyes. Just for a second, just long enough for me to see the calculation happening behind them, the rapid, practiced reassessment of a mind that does not stop moving even when it is absorbing something it did not expect. The file, she said quietly. The file, I said. Silence. Longer this time. The weight of it sitting between us in the kitchen like something solid. You never said anything, she said. Neither did you. She stood up slowly, walked to the window, stood there with her back to me, looking down at the street below, at the ordinary Friday afternoon happening without any awareness of what was occurring 3 floors above it. I let her stand there. I was not in any hurry. I had not been in a hurry for 17 months. How much? She said finally without turning around. How much what? How much do you have, Daniel? It was not really a question. It was the sound of a very precise mind doing mathematics and arriving at an answer it had not anticipated and did not particularly like. More than your lawyers thought, I said. She turned around, and I saw something in her face that I had not expected, had not fully prepared myself for even after everything. Not fury, not the controlled, strategic composure that had been her default presentation for as long as I had known her. Something stripped bare, something that looked, for just a moment, like a person rather than a position. What do you want, Daniel? She said, quieter now. What do you actually want? I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about the real answer to that question. Not the legal one, not the strategic one, but the one that had been sitting in me since that December night with the whiskey I did not drink. What did I want? I had wanted a real marriage. I had wanted the woman I had met at that mixer in February 2020. The one who laughed before I'd finished making my point. The one who asked real questions and meant them. The one who had seemed, for a while, like someone I could trust completely with the parts of myself I kept quiet. But that woman had been a performance, carefully constructed and consistently maintained, and genuinely impressive in its execution, but a performance nonetheless. And you cannot want back something that never existed. Nothing you haven't already offered, I said. The prenup stands. Your terms, every word exactly as you wrote them. She stared at me, waiting for the catch, because there is always a catch, in her experience, in every negotiation, in every room where something significant is being decided. You have 12% of my company, she said. I do. The suppliers. Also me. Ethan. 4 layers, I said. But yes. She shook her head slowly. Not in anger, in something that looked closer to a disbelief she was working to process and could not quite complete. You built all of that, she said, while living here, while having dinner with me, while walking Presidio on Sunday mornings like everything was completely normal. She paused. You were planning year 5. You were planning year 5. I said, I was planning the rest of the board. She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the fog coming off the bay had shifted position the way it does in late afternoon, slow and thorough, covering everything it touched. When she spoke again, her voice was composed. Back to the Victoria I knew, the Control One, the CEO, but her eyes were different. Something in them had changed that I did not think would change back. I underestimated you, she said. I held her gaze. Yes, I said. You did. She nodded once, picked up her bag, walked out of the kitchen. I heard the front door close behind her, and the sound of it was different from every other time I had heard that door close. Final in a way that previous closings had not been. I stood at the window for a while, looking out at the same street she had just looked at, the same fog, the same ordinary city moving below. It did not feel like winning. Not exactly. Not in the clean, triumphant way people imagine winning feels when they are planning something from the outside. It felt like something ending that had, from a very early point, been going to end. That should have been different from the very beginning. That should have been real. I poured a glass of water, drank it standing at the sink. Then I called Grant. She knows, I said. How did she take it? I thought about that for a genuine moment. The composure that held almost to the very end. The one moment where something real had shone through it. Like herself, I said, right up until the end. The formal dissolution proceedings began the following week. Grant and Nathan Cross sat across from each other in a conference room on the 34th floor of a building in the financial district, 3 blocks from my Saturday morning office, which I found quietly satisfying in a particular way that small, precise details can be satisfying when larger things are not. The prenup Victoria had drafted protected everything she had publicly declared: her real estate, her personal accounts, her declared FESCOR equity. It was a thorough, well-constructed document, the product of real legal work by competent people. It said nothing about Harlan Ridge, not one word. Nothing about the freight suppliers, nothing about the Ethan Cole Fund, because she had written that prenup in a world where Daniel Price was a comfortable, low-profile consultant with minimal assets and a modest life in Pacific Heights. She had protected herself against the man she thought she had married. She had no protection whatsoever against the man she actually married. Grant told me later that Nathan Cross sat across that conference table looking like a man attempting to solve a puzzle where someone had, at some point, quietly and systematically replaced half the pieces. Your prenup is airtight, Grant told him pleasantly. Every asset your client listed is fully protected. And his assets, Cross asked carefully. Not listed, Grant said, therefore not subject to the agreement. She'll contest. On what grounds? Grant said, she drafted it. Nathan Cross had no answer for that. Neither, ultimately, did Victoria. The papers were signed on a Tuesday morning in late May 2024. I moved out of our home in Pacific Heights that week, hired 2 people, took what was mine, left everything that was hers exactly where she had placed it. Clean, efficient. She would have appreciated the efficiency, I thought, under different circumstances. I took an apartment in the Marina District, 15th floor. View of the bay, the bridge, the whole glittering and magnificently indifferent city spread out below, as if it were showing off, which San Francisco always is slightly, even when it is not trying. I stood at that window the first night with a glass of Napa Red and felt something I had not felt in almost 2 years. Still, not happy exactly, not triumphant, just still, the way a room feels after a long and sustained noise finally stops, and you realize, only in its absence, how loud it had been the entire time. That summer, FESCOR's board called an emergency session. Harlan Ridge's 12% stake, now public through the dissolution filing, had sent ripples through the investor community that were difficult to contain. The institutional investor who had been patient for 2 years, the same one who had sent expensive wedding flowers back in May 2021, suddenly requested a formal meeting. I finally understood in retrospect why investors send wedding flowers to a CEO's wedding. They were not celebrating a marriage. They were protecting an investment, making a relationship with the person who would be closest to her. Questions that Victoria could not answer cleanly. A board running out of the patience it had maintained for 2 years. An atmosphere that had shifted in ways that were difficult to articulate but impossible to ignore. Ethan Cole resigned from FESCOR a few weeks later. The official reason given was personal pursuits. The actual reason was that his personal investment fund, anchored for layers deep by Daniel Price, had become a conversation he could not finish without the answer becoming more complicated than he was prepared to manage. I never made a single phone call to make that happen. I did not have to. The architecture did its work without me. By late summer, FESCOR's board reached out to Grant. not adversarially, almost apologetically, in the careful way that boards reach out when they need something and are aware that the asking requires a certain delicacy. They were looking for stability. Harlan Ridge's stake commanded respect. Would Mr. Price consider a formal role? Grant forwarded the message to me without comment. I read it twice. Thought about a Wednesday night in February 2020. A woman in a black dress appearing beside me at a Stanford mixer, like she had always been there. A smile with terms and conditions I had never agreed to. You're not working the room. I was not, but I was paying attention to every single person in it. I called Grant. Tell them I'll take the chairmanship, I said. Not the advisory role. The chairmanship. They need someone who actually understands what they built. You know she's going to see that announcement, Grant said. I know. I looked out at the bay from my marina apartment. The bridge lit up in the late afternoon light. Fog rolling in off the water the way it always does. Slow and inevitable and completely indifferent to everyone's timeline. It's just business, I said. On a Sunday morning in early September 2024, I read about the FESCOR chairmanship announcement in the business section over coffee at a small cafe in the marina. Good espresso. Nobody in the room knew who I was. That is still my favorite part. Lucas called at 10 in the morning. I saw the announcement, he said. Morning, Lucas. Daniel. A pause. The kind of pause that means something is being composed. I told you. You told me she was intentional. I told you the intention might be something you didn't know about yet. You did? I said. You were right. So what now? I looked out the cafe window at the marina on a Sunday morning. People walking dogs. Someone on a bicycle. The bay visible between the buildings, flat and silver and going about its own business. Now, I said, I finished my coffee. I set the cup down. I built what I built. I protected what I protected. She made her choices. I made mine. And you're okay? I thought about that. Really thought about it. The way the question deserved. The December night with the whiskey I poured out. The ceiling I had stared at. The pasta I made for two on a Sunday in November 2022, while 12 pages of Careful Betrayal sat 3 feet away from me on the desk. I thought about what I had wanted and what I had gotten instead, and how sometimes those two things, even when they're entirely different from each other, still somehow add up to something you can build a life from. Yeah, I said, I'm okay. And the thing about that answer, the thing I noticed as I said it and set the cup down and watched the fog continue its slow and different progress across the bay, was that I meant it, completely. If this story stayed with you, leave your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you are watching from, and what kind of story you want to hear next.